What's up? This is Star Red Rock, and we are at Blerd City Con, a conference for the nerd in you. Today we're exploring the concepts of Afrofuturism and horror and how they intersect with blerd culture. How do we utilize horror to tell the stories of the Black diaspora? We've been to a few of these festivals by now, but two concepts that we haven't explored yet are Afrofuturism and horror. These concepts are prevalent throughout blerd culture, but Blerd City Con in particular had a heavy focus on both. Let's start with Afrofuturism. Think of it as an umbrella term over blerd culture, which also includes epithets like comic books, movies, art, science, technology, philosophy, and history. There's a lot to it, but in short, Afrofuturism is concerned with all of the aforementioned elements, how those things are viewed through a Black lens, and how those things apply to our future.
And I am cosplaying as Oya from Uncanny X-Men. She has the power to control fire and ice, and in her village in Nigeria where she's from, she's seen as a witch because she has these powers. But if you also follow Yoruba culture, Oya is the Orisha of like thunderstorms and war and darkness and death.
So just tell me a little bit about what Afrofuturism is and what does that mean to people who are in this space?
For me, Afrofuturism is a way to reclaim our future as people from the African diaspora and rewrite what is possible for us and not stick to the norm of what people think is only possible for us, as in rewriting our history and heritage that was also stolen from us and creating that new future to honor our ancestors and those who came before us.
Tell me a little bit about who you're channeling today.
Lieutenant Uhura is one of my favorite Star Trek characters, and I'm doing steampunk, so I just decided to hook up the red and black steampunk, put on the Star Trek so everyone knows that, yeah. I was a Star Trek fan, and my parents were Star Trek fans. Okay. They got me into it. At 5, we're sitting down watching Star Trek episodes, and then the family would say, okay, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this character? Normally talking about, an African-American character. And we were trained from birth to see ourselves in the future. We were trained from birth, from 5 on up, watching Star Trek episodes to see ourselves exploring and being adventurous and being creative. And Star Trek's characters, African-American characters, have always been intelligent, strong, positive, cutting-edge technology and everything like that. So I'm very much for the Afrofuturism, very much for it.
When I spoke to Blerd City founder Clarissa Clay, she cited the late author Octavia Butler, whose books were rife with Afrofuturistic themes, as an inspiration. So there's some interesting things about the themes of Blerd City. One of them is Afrofuturism. Yes. Right? So just talk about what is Afrofuturism and why was it important for you to incorporate that into Blerd City?
Definitely always want to see, that might be my sci-fi reading, mostly that like Octavia Butler is like #1 for me, and Parallel Souls like touched me for the rest of my life. I was like, when I read it, I was like, oh my God, what I'm going to do for the future, what I'm going to do for the present. And I really had that kind of anxiety about it because I thought, how this world is when you are pressing up against one, police brutality. We just use that one alone. It's like, what if police brutality has been happening throughout the existence of police against people of color for so long? Like in the future, you're thinking, oh, this can still be here. How you're going to do? How it's going to impact you? Because our neighborhoods are changing and so forth. So to take Afrofuturism as to literally talk, to say about how our people are going to be in the future, that's what made one of the reasons for it.
Blerd City Con panelists and patrons that I spoke to all had their own ideas of what Afrofuturism is. One of the things we're exploring today is Afrofuturism, right?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
And I think that concept kind of came to the mainstream by way of Black Panther. What is Afrofuturism? How does it relate to the culture? And then what are some films that we could look to for examples?
I think it's a genre that has different definitions, frankly. I think we can talk about something set in the future, literally in the future, could arguably be Afrofuturism. You could talk about just blackness out in an extraordinary context. Could also be Afrofuturism. You know, I think really Afrofuturism represents potential.
Okay.
You know, if I had to use one word.
Yeah, and it is an aspect of, I guess, Black Hollywood or Black movie making that people don't pay attention to. So we actually, in April, we do a month of Afrofuturistic film.
We're actually here to talk about Men in Black, the first Men in Black.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Nice.
So we down with Afrofuturism.
Of course.
And then there's horror. Horrific themes intersect blerd culture, where comic books, movies, and sci-fi meet. For Black people, horror isn't necessarily just the cliche slasher with a chainsaw. It could be that undercover racist who wants to kill you and take over your body. Because people of the African diaspora have such a unique experience in this world, we turn to creativity to express our frustrations and observations. Horror is actually the perfect vessel for that. Movies like Get Out or even Candyman have been perfect tools for exploring those themes.
Daniel Robitaille is his actual name. People call him just the Candyman. The man had a whole name and backstory behind it. The first film didn't really get into who he was as an individual before his untimely accident, but it did give you a reason why to be afraid of him.
Well, I think horror, just in general, is quantifiable as a nerdy or geeky thing, right? It's a very specific vein of fascination. But when it comes to Black horror or Black experiences in horror, I feel like our lens is completely different, right? A lot of the mainstream part of that genre is told through a white lens, right? Their experiences, their stories, and things that would be terrifying as far as their experiences are concerned.
Right.
Whereas our experiences are more often than not completely different.
Right.
So the lens changes. You know, what might necessarily be frightening to another group of people isn't necessarily frightening to us. And it really gives us a chance to explore the complexities of that. You know, it's more than just, urban living or dealing with racism or code switching or anything like that. There are nuances to it that I think deserve to be explored. And this is a great opportunity to do that. It's almost like exploring Black villainy, right? A lot of villains that we know of in comic books, for example, are labeled villains because they exist outside of what that white lens perceives as justice. Whereas in our case, it doesn't necessarily always line up. So I feel like when you're looking at Black villains, when you're looking at Black horror and Black presence in horror, it's a completely different ball of wax.
And that's a wrap on this year's Blerd City Con. As you can see, there's lots of horrors we experience living in a Black body. Racism, gentrification, those are just a few. And horror is the perfect genre to utilize to tell those stories effectively.